14 miles west of Athens, there is a field of broken stone. Buses pass it on the way to the coast. Most of them do not stop. There is no famous statue here, no golden roof, no postcard, only foundations, steps that lead nowhere, a hillside of gray rock and dry grass. And yet, for almost 2,000 years, this was the most important place in the ancient world. Emperors came here, philosophers came here, poets, generals, slaves, women, foreigners. They walked the same road. They drank the same cup. They entered the same building, and every single one of them came out changed. We know their names. We know the year they came. We know what they ate, what they wore, and how long they fasted. We know everything, except the one thing that mattered, because not one of them, in 2,000 years, ever said what happened inside. The road began in Athens. Every autumn, in the month the Greeks called Bothromium, a crowd gathered at the city gates. They were not soldiers. They were not pilgrims in the way we imagine pilgrims. They were ordinary people who had decided, once in their lives, to walk toward the border of death and look at it directly. They carried nothing valuable. They wore old clothes they intended to destroy afterward. And they walked 19 kilometers along a road the Greeks called simply the Sacred Way. It crossed olive country, a salt lake, a narrow bridge. At the bridge, masked men waited. They shouted insults at the walkers, filthy ones, personal ones. This was not cruelty. It was part of the ritual. Before you approach the dead, your pride has to die first. By nightfall, the crowd reached the sea. Torches moved across the plain like a slow river of fire, and ahead of them, Eleusis. To understand why that town mattered, you have to go back to a grieving mother. When Persephone vanished into the earth, Demeter did not go to Olympus. She did not ask Zeus for justice. She walked. 9 days, no food, no sleep, no word to any god. And on the 9th day, exhausted as an old woman, she sat down beside a well in a small farming town. She did not choose a palace. She chose Eleusis. The daughters of the local king found her there. They did not know she was a goddess. They saw an old woman with nothing, and they took her home. They gave her a chair, a drink, a place by the fire. That is the detail the Greeks never forgot. The most powerful goddess of the harvest was saved by ordinary human kindness. She stayed in that house. She nursed the queen's infant son. And at night, when the household slept, she held the child in the flames of the hearth, burning away his mortality, hour by hour, to make him deathless. Then the queen woke. She saw her baby in the fire. She screamed, and the spell broke. Demeter rose to her full height, the room filled with light, and she spoke the sentence that built everything that came after. You do not understand what you have taken from him. The boy would live, but he would die like every other man, because a mother's fear had interrupted a goddess's gift. Demeter gave them one command before she left the house. Build me a temple, and I will teach you something no mortal has ever been taught. They built it, and then the famine came. While Demeter grieved, the earth refused to give. Seeds stayed dead in the soil. Cattle starved. The gods received no offerings, because there was nothing left to offer. Only when Persephone returned did the world breathe again, and when the goddess walked out of Eleusis at last, she left the town a gift for its kindness. Not gold, not power, a secret. She taught them what she had learned in the worst year of her existence, that the seed must go into the dark to become anything at all. That descent is not the opposite of life, it is the condition of it. The Greeks called this teaching the Mysteries. The building where it was taught was unlike any other Greek temple. Greek temples were built to be seen from outside. Columns, sunlight, open air. The Telesterion was the opposite, a vast square hall, stone tiers rising on all four walls, like an inverted theater. Room for 3,000 people, not a single window, and in the exact center, a small windowless stone chamber that only one man was allowed to enter. The Anacteron. Whatever the mysteries were, they were kept inside that room. Before entering, the initiates broke their fast. They had not eaten all day. Now they drank barley, water, and mint, the same cup you already know. Kykeon. They drank the memory of a nymph who had become the boundary itself. And then they walked into the dark. What happened next has 3 names, and only 3. The things said, the things done, the things shown. That is the entire surviving description. Every ancient author who mentions the mysteries stops at exactly this point, not because they forgot, because they were afraid. Revealing the mysteries carried the death penalty. The playwright Aeschylus was nearly torn apart by a crowd for a single line in a play that came too close. The general Alcibiades, one of the most powerful men in Athens, was condemned and exiled for performing a parody of the ritual at a private dinner. Athens forgave men for losing armies. It did not forgive this, and so we are left with fragments. Total darkness inside the hall, silence held for hours, something spoken by the Hierophant, the man who makes the holy things appear. And then, at the final moment, a fire, an enormous fire, opened suddenly inside a windowless room, seen by 3,000 people who had been sitting in the dark all night. One ancient writer says only this, that the Hierophant stood in the light and showed them a single ear of grain reaped in silence. That was it, a stalk of wheat, and it worked. That is the part that should unsettle you. These were not superstitious villagers. Cicero, lawyer, skeptic, the sharpest legal mind Rome produced, went to Eleusis, and afterwards he wrote that Athens had given the world many great things, but nothing greater than the mysteries. Because there, he said, we learn how to live in joy, and how to die with a better hope. Not why to die. How. Something inside that hall took away the fear. Something that could be experienced, but apparently never explained. For 2,000 years the fire was lit every autumn. Then, Rome became Christian. In 392, an emperor outlawed the old rites. 4 years later, an army came down the sacred way. They burned Eleusis. The last Hierophant died without an heir. The chain of teaching that had passed hand to hand since the Bronze Age ended in a single generation. No one wrote it down. No one broke the silence, even at the end. The gate closed, and the ruin on the hill is what remains. So the question survives instead of the answer. What did they see? Some say the kykeon itself was the key, that something grew in the barley of that plain, and the vision was chemical. Some say it was theater, darkness, sound, fire, exhaustion, and a crowd of 3,000 ready to believe. And some say the simplest explanation is the one the Greeks actually gave, that for one night the boundary thinned, that the herb of thresholds did what it had always done, and that the god who once knelt in the black soil of the underworld allowed the living, briefly, to stand on the far side of their own death. We will never know. But there is one more thing worth saying. Everything you have heard so far happened above the earth. The road, the cup, the hall, the fire. The Greeks believed something was happening below it at the same time. They believed there was a second ritual, one performed in the underworld itself, by someone who had waited all year for that single night. And that story begins with a queen.